The readings for Monday, January 16th. The epistle reading is from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 12, verses 1 through 11. Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. Then he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. So when he had arrested him, he put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Peter was therefore kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. And when Herod was about to bring him out, that night Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards before the door were keeping the prison. Now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, "Arise, quickly!" And his chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, "Gird yourself, and tie on your sandals." And so he did. And he said to him, "Put on your garment, and follow me." So he went out and followed him, and did not know that what was done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they were past the first and second guard posts, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. And when Peter had come to himself, he said, "Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel, and has delivered me from the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the Jewish people." All right, it's got some footnotes from the Orthodox Study Bible. It's pretty cool reading. The book of Acts is always pretty neat. So for this exact passage, verses 1 through 11, it says that this passage is read on days commemorating a holy martyr. I'm looking at the Synaxarion for the holy martyr, and actually today we venerate, it's the veneration of Apostle Peter's precious chains. So I forget which church, where those are kept, but there we go. That's got to be why we read that reading today. For verses 1 through 9, so a bulk of our reading here today. Herod Agrippa is the grandson of Herod the Great, who tried to kill Jesus as an infant in Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. Herod Agrippa ruled as king in Palestine under Rome in AD 41 through 44. The dates of his reign determine the period in which Jesus was killed, in verse 2, and Peter was imprisoned, in verse 3. James was the first of the 12 apostles to be martyred. This event reveals that by the year AD 44, there was growing popular displeasure against Christians. For verse 3, the days of unleavened bread marked the Passover period, and thus commemoration of the passion and resurrection of Christ. For verse 5, the power of intercessory prayer by the church on behalf of its leaders is evidenced by Peter's release from prison in verse 10. And for verses 9 through 11, Peter's initial confusion in verse 9 and subsequent understanding in verse 11 about his release from prison show that God's works are not always clear to us while they are unfolding, but in hindsight, his purpose often becomes clear. The Gospel reading is from the book of John, chapter 21, verses 14 through 25. This is now the 3rd time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, Follow me. Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper, and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, But Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Then this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but, If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? This is the disciple who testifies of these things, and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Amen. And that, of course, is the ending there of the Gospel of John. Let's hit some footnotes from the Orthodox Study Bible. So for verses 15 through 17, that Christ singles out Simon Peter has a twofold significance. Number one, Peter was the leader among the disciples, and thus had to be the first to confess his love for the risen Lord. And number two, Peter had denied the Christ 3 times, in chapter 18, verse 17, and chapter 25, verse 27. And here, Christ restores him with a threefold confession of love. It is important to note that the first 2 times Christ inquires of Peter, Do you love me? He uses a form of the word agape, which denotes the highest form of sacrificial and self-emptying love. The kind of love God has for a man and that man can develop only through maturing in God's grace. Each time, however, Peter is unable to claim such a lofty love. When Peter answers, You know that I love you, he uses the term philo, which is a lesser form of love akin to brotherly affection. When the Lord asks the third time, Do you love me? He has changed to the term philo, condescending to Peter's weakness and accepting whatever love Peter is able to offer. Nevertheless, Christ knows that Peter will develop agape love for him, as Peter will eventually accept martyrdom for his sake, as noted in verses 18 and 19. Peter was grieved both that the Lord had to condescend to his level of love, and that this was a clear, though gentle, reference to his 3 denials. For verses 18 and 19, this is Christ's second prophecy of Peter's martyrdom. See chapter 13, verse 36, which Peter would suffer under Nero in about AD 67 by being crucified upside down. In verses 20 through 23, this disciple is John, the author of this gospel. St. John lived a long life, dying at about the age of 100, circa AD 98 through 108, sometime in there. Early Christians marveled at his longevity, and some thought he would not die before the return of Christ. John corrects this assumption by clarifying that Jesus did not say to him that he would not die. For verse 24, John's use of we indicates that he had an assistant. Tradition holds John used a scribe named Prochorus, who wrote down his words and teachings. This scribe is shown in many icons. And for verse 25, acknowledging his gospel contains only a fraction of Christ's life. John has written his book to bring his hearers to faith, as noted in chapter 20, verse 31. While the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke contain many more miracles and parables, these too are far from exhaustive. This verse not only emphasizes the holiness of what was written, but also points to the ongoing oral tradition within the church. See 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 15. All right, everybody, well, that is a wrap. Hope you all have a blessed Monday and start to your week. And I will check back in with you all for tomorrow's readings. Please pray for me, a sinner. Thank you.